So, what are your first memories of my dad, and when did you start taking karate?
I started karate in 1973 at the University of Maine. We had the classes there. At the time, Tony Steinman was teaching for him. My first memory of him was when he used to show up during the classes, and he started sparring us one at a time, and I just couldn't believe what he could do. He was so big, but what he could do, it just got me hooked on it right then. And everybody always said, because Tony Steinman was, really good, when you watch from the beginning, but when your father came, he was unbelievable. So that kept me staying.
How many years had you studied karate, and has it influenced your life at all?
Oh, big influence, yeah. Father didn't just touch my life, he was a very big influence on it, just from where I stayed with him. What has it been, 23, 27 years I've been with him, and I've never stopped, so.
Any anecdotes you can think of any interesting things that ever happened?
Well, with your father, you mean?
Yeah. Or karate related?
There's just so many of them, I can't really think of any one thing. I think I was just always amazed at the way he could handle a class and control his classes, and I just wish it never ended,
What do you think his greatest strength was?
His greatest strength? I think everybody respected him, I think, is his biggest strength. And I always had the utmost respect for him.
And why?
It's just hard to say. It's just the way a person comes across to you when you meet him. I just always had that respect for him ever since I met him.
Great. Anything else you can think of you want to add about him?
No, he was just a good teacher. He always wanted you to be better than he was, because he didn't care. I mean, he wanted to get the best out of everybody. And I think that's what I liked about him the most.
Thanks.
Maggie Batchelor.
My name is Henry Smith.
Wonderful. Okay. You're just having a conversation with Diane. Go ahead.
Okay, Diane.
Henry, good afternoon.
How are you?
I'm fine. How are you?
Good.
How long have you known Reggie Groff? When did you first meet him?
I met Reggie. I came to Maine in December of '72, and I did some boxing for about a year. And then I met a friend of mine, Dave McKenzie, who was also a student of Reginald Groff. And in 1973, I went up and then I joined Maine Karate Association. And so I did that until 1983, 84, 85, on and off, because I wind up doing two different styles at that particular point in time. But I can reflect back when I first started doing karate. Reggie always said that I was a natural, because I went from boxing right into that. And I remember my first month that I was in a tournament. We went up to Orono, and I went up there and I won this tournament. And then when I came back, he says, "You're too good to be a beginner," so he promoted me right up to a green belt. So we wind up skipping a belt. So, which was nice. I really didn't want to do that, because I believe in hard work and dedication. You're going to prove yourself anyway, and without somebody giving it to me. And the classes were vigorous. They were rough. They were tough. I would say that the training back then is a lot more superior than what you had today, because people have made so much of it as a sport, and where he really got into the specifics of it. When you did form or when you did fighting, you really, dedicated yourself, you pushed yourself, and if you didn't push yourself, he would push you. We used to be in stances, like karate stances, especially like in a horse stance sometimes, or sometimes maybe in a forage stance. He would take a shinai, which is a bamboo stick, and he would come by and he would whack us across the leg or across the back of the thigh or across the belly. Make sure that you had your posture right. And sometimes you'd be in these stances and you'd just be shaking, and it's like, oh man, when is he gonna let us out? And he said, no, if somebody messed up, you just stayed in it a little bit longer.
How long were the classes? Each individual
Well,
session is these?
they went an hour or over an hour. All depends on which class you were in. You got to look at it realistically. When you started as a beginner, you know you're just beginning. But after you've been into it for a while, it gets more strenuous because you know if you want to be good, you got to work hard at it. And he was a very good disciple at making you work hard at it. Just as in your previous interview when you talked to the young lady, she says that when you were doing form, she says, you know, if you didn't do it right, hey, you do it over again. And if you talk about testing, I would go and take my tests. I can remember once when I was going for a black belt, the first time that I did it, he had me spar a guy, and I was sparring the guy, and he kind of got me upset. I should say Reggie got me upset. And so when the guy came in, I dropped down and I put my foot into his midsection and I flipped him. He almost hit the front desk. And Reggie told me to get out of class. You know, so I look back at that because, you know, sometimes you get carried away with yourself sometimes because you think you're doing something right and then he'll say, no, you're not doing it right. And you just, you know, you move on. But we came back in. But it was good because he gave you good structure behind what he was teaching. And I think that's the good philosophy because everybody was an individual. And when he looked at people, he looked at them not just at the capabilities of what they had, because you have some people who were natural and they blend right in. You had some people who were mediocre and they had to work at it. And then you had those that had a hard time. And the ones that had a hard time, you know, you give a little bit more push because you want them to be just as good. And some of the things, like we used to spar in class, I can think about when he used to have me be up front of class and then I would have to spar everybody, you know, and then I'd have to spar him. And one thing I would say about Reggie, you know, even though because of his size, his timing was excellent. And I remember one time I got in behind one of his backhands and his foot. I blocked his kick and got behind him, and I gave him a ridge hand, which caught him right here and put my leg behind him, put him down. And then I remember just rising up, and I took off and I ran. You know, but that was, you know, that was a memorable moment. But going back to the test, even though I refused, I waited a year before I took my test because I didn't want it to be because of my natural ability. I wanted to be because I deserved to have a black belt. And I don't know if my friend Tony has been here yet, but Tony was another student that we worked together, and he used to have us doing a whole lot of sparring, and we used to do forms. And through Reggie's teachings, I won a lot of championships here in Maine. I go back and I know that for 7 years in a row I won like state championships under his tutelage, you know, and so, which was exciting. So that's something that you're always going to have to cherish. And even some of the pictures that I've seen out there that he has, I still have some of those memoirs.
How has all of this affected your life personally? And
well,
you spoke a little bit about how he trained and how he taught and his whole demeanor, but how has this really translated into your whole life?
Well, it made me feel as though that if I wanted to accomplish something, I can be an achiever. In other words, when somebody asks you, how good do you want to be, you don't say as good as the instructor, you say I want to be better than. So that was the philosophy that I got out of it, because I passed that down to people that I used to give instruction to when I taught private classes. Even when I stopped doing traditional karate, Shotokan, and went to do a different style of karate in full contact, I used to say the same questions. I would ask somebody, hey, how good do you want to be? And they say, I want to be like you. And I said, no, you don't. You want to be better than I, because you can always push yourself because there's always somebody better. And I think the other aspect of karate, yes, the belt just holds up your pants. It's a thing of having integrity in what you know, knowing when to use and when not to use, because one of the things that Reggie did stress a lot, it's not for fighting, it's for defending, and you make it your last resort. And through that, you know, even as we talk about the tournament fighting and so forth, I talked about in the state, I've accomplished things outside of the state, you know, down in Virginia, down in Ohio, all around the New England, so, which was good, and you know, and that was from his teachings, you know. So,
is there anything you'd like to say to his family?
as I was telling Reggie earlier, I know that Joanne had passed away, and I missed that because I was not around. But when I saw this in the paper yesterday, I said, well, this is something that I'm not going to let get by me. I'm going to make sure that I get over, because I've known Reggie and Debbie and Andrew ever since they were, little kids, and we've always been close. And even in Joanne, when I was in the hospital, when I had my knees operated on twice, she was always one that was there when I was in the hospital. So, so just to reflect back on the family, I just want to say, keep the faith. Even though he has passed on, and she has passed on, through them, there would be great unity, and they just need to keep that up. And I'm saddened by the loss of their father, because he meant a great deal to me. I didn't see him as often as when I was working out all the time, but once in a while I used to pop by the house unexpectedly. But because of my involvement in other things, I was too busy to get around and see a lot of folks. But my hat is off to the family. My prayers are with the family, and I just want to say thank you for this time.
Well, your presence is a gift to me.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, my name is Mike Cook. I'm an instructor with the Maine Karate Association at Farmington, and I first met Reggie and started training with him in 1966. And he's been a hell of a mentor for me for all these years, and we developed a very strong friendship. And we used to travel. We went back and forth to New York for karate events, and we went back and forth to Boston to train with Tabata. And I used to come down and get private lessons. It's about a 2-hour trip for me from Farmington. I used to come down and have private lessons with Reggie once or twice a month during the mid to early 80s and into the early 90s. And
what were some of those early travels like? You mentioned New York.
yeah, one time we went to New York. He bought a brand new car. We went down there and had a meeting for 3 or 4 hours and trained with Sensei Mori and Sensei Nishiyama, and then we had to drive back that night. And about 11:30 night on the New York freeway, we had a flat tire, and his brand new car didn't have a jack. So here we are out in the middle of nowhere, and he said, well, don't be afraid. He says, you're a karate instructor. And I said, yeah, right. But finally, AAA came along and did change the tire for us, and we were able to get back. But that was one of those 24-hour marathons that we went on. And Boston was the same way. We'd get down there and down and back in the evening. And for him, it wasn't too bad because he stopped off in Portland. I still had another 2-hour drive all the way to Farmington, but we'd crank up on a lot of coffee and talk a lot. He was a walking encyclopedia, and I learned a lot about the inside of karate and just life in general from Reggie. And,
what were some of the things that you had as common interests?
Um,
Outside of karate? Were there others?
Actually, we didn't. Karate was our common thread that we had. And he was my instructor, my first karate instructor. I had judo prior to coming to Reggie's dojo. But he just had a certain unique way about him teaching, and his philosophy of learning karate as a self-defense but not being aggressive with it. And he just made a hell of an impact on me, and obviously the thousands of other people that he had as students over these years. So I'm going to miss him very much.
I met Reggie in 1972. The reason I started martial arts for 16 years in all, and I've known him for 31 years, because he put an ad in one of those little coupon books that you can buy for carpeting, or you can get this little ticket or that little ticket, and he had a week's worth of free karate. And I was married at the time with 3 children, and I wanted something to do different, and I just thought I'd take my week free. So I had this little coupon book, and I took this little ticket and did my 1 week free and spent the next 16 years doing it. So, and I taught for 3 of them.
What was he like as an instructor?
You always knew whatever you learned from him would be like the best you could ever learn. And all our tournaments, there would be other styles of karate rather than Shotokan. And we would, because that's a blend of the other ones, and he studied them all. So we would always win all the tournaments because we knew all of the other people's different styles, but they didn't know ours because, ours was so blended. And he would, as it says in the ad in the paper, not the ad, the obituary in the paper, it says how he would make things his own. He would say something that didn't work, and so because it didn't work or it was a clumsy thing, he'd change it so that it worked. And so we always, whenever we did any tournaments, we would always win them because we always had that special personal touch. He was just really, I always thought of him as a genius when it came to that. But he taught he's an old school karate. It's not like the new schools now you see in the TV versions. You know, it's kung fu, break boards and things like that. He always taught more of a self-control kind of karate. And he would get students that were sent because they were ill-coordinated, so that he would help them to coordinate better. People with a temperament, he would get them to be very gentle. And it was always in back of all of his studying, it was always that you were to only use this martial arts in a defensive mode only. And you were always to do it at the last resort.
How has that affected your life?
Oh, self-control is just, self-control, peacefulness. If you get into an aggressive situation, you would always have this peaceful feeling of, rather than get aggressive and defensive, you would have some control. And the self-control was really a big issue with him. He was like, you didn't get mad, you tried to be calm, you tried to, and you spend it in your whole life. And I think probably that's why I ended up going to USM and going into counseling and psychology, and I think I just did all that because of that, just a peacefulness in me. And then I had, with a youth alternatives group, I used to have teenagers in my house, shelter kids, you'd call them. And a lot of times I would take them to class with me. They were street children, they were teenagers. I would take them to class with me, and some of them would just continue on. Afterwards, I think that they just found what they needed, instead of being on the streets.
Run by Reggie? Were these his classes
Yes.
at the time?
Yep. And
How did he handle that situation?
just get right in there. If I brought somebody in and I said, he's here with me today, he'd say, get up, go. And he would give them special treatment when they came in. Just make them welcome and make them feel like they've been there all the days and weeks and months. He just was like that, just really warm. Always. I had a story to tell, though. The day I got my black belt was, first of all, I'd gotten my green belt in like 3 months, and that's quick. I'd gone from, you start out as white and yellow. I went from white to green immediately. And one night I was pretty good. We'd gone to a tournament and there were no brown belts. They were all brown belts, and there was no green belts for me in my level of knowledge to spar with in the tournament. So I had to do it with brown belts. So I did pretty good. In fact, I came in second and third in 2 different areas, and competed both times with the first winner. So one day we're in class, very soon after that, and I just got my green belt, and this is how he would think. He knew his students intimately like that, with their capabilities, and he would give you something ahead of time to encourage you to get there. And it's a level of knowledge. Each belt is just a level of the knowledge that you're at. So just like, junior, senior, freshman type thing. So I'm here as my green belt, and it's only been about 6 or 7 months, and that's very quick for me to suddenly be in class one day, and I'm sparring, and I had just won these tournaments with these brown belts. And he said, so next week we're going to do such and such, an announcement here, an announcement there. And he says, oh, by the way, you have your brown belt. That's how I got my brown belt. No test, just, oh, by the way, I'm giving you your brown belt. Just like that. 2 weeks later, no, that was purple, excuse me, that was purple. 2 weeks later, he said, oh, let's make it brown. And so the big excitement for people who've gone that far and they went to get, it's time for their black belt. I'm in SMVTI at the time, in the gym, and I'm teaching a class there. So after the class, he had come with me to, I said, why don't you come next week and, and you take him through the class and I'll be there too. So it came to next week. He came. After the class, we're shutting all the lights out. There's a lobby, and you shut the doors to the gym, and the lobby's in front of it. And you turn all the lights out, and there's trophies on the side walls. And he said, Haikadashi. And I turned around and I said, what? Because we're about to shut the lights out. He said, Haikadashi. And he means I come to attention. So it's an instinct after a while. You just do what he said, be out of respect. So I'm like, he said, I want you to go through Basai Dai, which is a black belt kata. And I'm like, what? We were like shutting the lights on and going out the door. And he says, just do it. So I said, yes, sir. So I did my Basai Dai, and he says, do it again. And I want you to do it in 90 seconds. So this is a prearranged bunch of moves in Basai Dai. It's pretty big, pretty large, kind of like dance movements. You wonder how these people can remember all these dance movements and all together. That you just learn things in an arrangement. So that's what kata is, and Basai Dai is a kata, a black belt kata. So I did it again this time, and I was just exhausted because I tried to do it in 90 minutes. It's like all over the place. And he said, all right. And he said, you got your black belt. And that was it. And I'm like, what? And I said, but, okay. So he says, I don't have any more black belts, so you can have mine. So he took off. He took his black belt off and gave it to me. And I still have it. And that's just the way he was. He just, each student got that special attention.
Thank you for sharing.
You're welcome.
Yes, my name's Bruce Barker, and I live in Dixmont, Maine right now, but I grew up in Portland. And when I was about almost 16 years old, I became interested in karate. Saw an article in the Portland newspaper. And I and a couple friends went up to the school, and at that point it was a Uechi-Ryu school taught by a Mr. Fulton, I believe. And we watched it and I decided out of the three of us to come back and try it out. And when I went back, the instructor wasn't there, but Reggie was the senior student at that school at the time, and he started taking the classes, and this went on for several weeks. The other instructor never showed up, and we'd all show up, and he said, well, okay, I'll take the class tonight. Well, after about 2 or 3 weeks, he informed there was about half a dozen of us, said that he had studied Shotokan karate before. He had a higher rank in that, a level of brown belt in that, and that if we didn't mind, he'd like to teach that. And after 3 weeks, it didn't matter to me. I didn't know enough about it but I'm glad he did anyway. So we started, there was about half a dozen of us originally up on the 3rd and 4th floor of 18A Monument Square, and started taking karate lessons.
So you were his first student, so this was
the first
location.
Yeah, Monument Square.
Yeah.
And it was about less than a year later, his original instructor, who was then teaching in Washington, D.C., I guess Reggie had taken from him in Portland, his name was Wayne Collins, came up to Maine, this would have been spring of '67, and did some testing, tested some of us up to brown belt levels, and promoted Reggie to black belt at that time. And then it just took off from there. And I ended up going to the University of Maine, Orono, and staying up in that area, and of course Maine karate just spread here and there, and students all over the country.
Have you stayed in touch with Reggie over those years?
Yeah, here and there. We kind of, since I moved up, when I went up there, of course, less and less time that we see each other, but we'd see each other at tournaments, or I'd come down and work out once in a while, and then saw him, it was about a year ago, I think it was up in Wyndham, I believe. It was a tournament, and saw him there, and that's about the last time I had seen him. But,
what are those things about Reggie that have made a lasting impact on you?
Work ethic. I mean, that you if you put effort into it, you'll get results. I mean, when I was a teenager at the time, and well, everybody knows a lot of the work ethics of teenagers, but just being in that karate class, and he would push us. I mean, he would push us till we were drenched in sweat, and I can't say that in the middle of it that I loved it, because I felt like I was ready to pass out. But afterwards, you'd feel better, and of course now I realize how important that was to accomplishing anything. Going, not doing it 50%, but putting 100% into it, and that's probably the main thing I learned. Other than karate, obviously the basics of karate, but just that, if you have something you want to do, you have something, don't be afraid to just go put yourself into it and do it, and sometimes you fall down, sometimes you, but just get up and keep doing it, keep at it. And I think that's why I'm still doing karate today, because from those early, back, if I'd been in another school and just kind of, well, here you go, just work out, put whatever effort you want to do into it, and here's your belt. I doubt if I would have stayed with it, because it wouldn't have meant that much. But those early years, it just allowed me to kind of fall in love with it and stay with it.
How passionate was he as a teacher?
Very.
Could you describe it for us?
Well, he expected you to not to push to your limit. Like, in other words, if he could sense it, you were not giving out what you're capable of, he would, he'd get very strict. He'd carry around that shinai, that bamboo pole, and, like if you're taking it easy, your stance, legs were getting tight or whatever, and, whack, and it wasn't like any damage. It's not like, but you'd feel it, wake you up and say, okay, yeah, and then you realize you do it, and then you'd say, well, I guess I did have it in me. I thought I didn't, but obviously a little bit of motivation here. And I think the other thing that it did, it was a discipline type of instruction, but it ultimately taught me self-discipline. That that it's worthy not to always have somebody right there to make you do it, but realize that what, you can you can do that. I mean, it's good in those formative years to have somebody do that, but it teaches you that, in the long run, you have the capability of doing better, and trying harder and doing better.
Is there any other message that you'd like to share?
Well, I'd just like
to his family, or to
my condolences, particularly over this past year, to Reggie Jr. and his family for loss of both their mother and father. And I'd just like to say he was one of the important people in my life. I mean, karate now is one of my major parts of my life, and obviously, walking into that class at night and starting up was a key turning point in my life. And I'll always remember him for that, and thank him, and keep thanking him. Yeah, so.
Do you teach?
Yes.
You teach karate?
Yes.
Do you teach much in the same style as Reggie, and would you attribute some of your way of doing things to the way that Reg taught you?
Oh, sure, yeah. A lot of the basics, the kata. I belong to a Shotokan Karate International Federation, and the head of that is a former JKA master who basically Reggie's, a lot of his system is based on JKA, and then some from Mr. Tabata in Boston. So it's pretty much the same. The kata, there may be some differences, minor things here and there in the kata that are just normal from organization to organization, but the stances, the basic, the ki-on, or basic practice up and down the floor, it's pretty much, I have studied other martial arts through the years, picked up this and that, but finally gravitated back to Shotokan and said, this is where I want to do my focus. And so a lot of it, yeah, it's pretty much the same, you know. Like I said, minor differences, but.
If you were going to say thank you to Reg Groff for something, what would you say? You know, I would think, if I had the chance, I'd thank Reg for this, and speak to Diane if you would, please.
Yeah, I'd thank him for, again, just being there, giving him the opportunity to, as a teenager, particularly when I walked into that class as a teenager, not really having much ambition or any goals at that point. I didn't really like school, but give me the opportunity to learn from him and take the knowledge he had, and like I said before, just something that I can. Well, I'm still doing it. I mean, I don't see myself not doing this ever, no matter what happens. And I think that's a pretty, you know, to me that's a pretty big deal. And I thank him for giving me something that is such a lifelong thing. I mean, it's a never-ending thing. It's just something that it's not like, okay, here it is, good, do 2 or 3 years, put it on the shelf. This keeps on going. And you know, but there's not very many people in the world that I can say that about. That, you know, of course I have my parents and so forth, but you know, he was kind of like another father. You know, when I go into that class, another father, give me, you know, okay, it's time to do this. You know, do I have to? Yep, you're here. This is what works.
In our lives, we each have those few people who have that significant influence, and it sounds like Reggie Groff is one of those.
Oh, definitely, yeah.
How do you think his legacy will live on?
I think it's living on through the, countless thousands at this point of students who have either stayed in the area teaching, who have moved elsewhere in the state, have moved other states in the country, out of the country, who still take what he's shown them and probably everybody puts their own personality into their karate or whatever, but have taken that basis and then continue to teach or practice. So it's like he started put the seed and the roots down and everything. It's just like a kind of a garden that's just gone everywhere. And that's just speaking from the karate point. I mean, all this other stuff, you know, the films, the books, and I'm sure everybody in that aspect, you know, has stories. He's just so many things that he was involved in that.
Did you know at the time about some of those other things? Because we know he was a very prolific man.
I didn't know how prolific.
Artist. And
I didn't realize how prolific. I mean, he never would talk, you know, much about it, but I'd go to his house up on Sheridan Street sometimes, and I'd see art on the wall, and oh, I did that, you know, oh, that's good, you know, and yeah, I'm working on this and that. That's interesting, but I had no idea that all this other activities were. I had no idea, you know, that he was so involved in it. I knew he was involved in the East End projects there back in the '60s, but again, being a teenager at that time, I didn't really, you know, it was like I knew about it, but didn't pay that much attention to it. So, and that legacy will keep going.
that legacy, yeah.
And this history. I mean, this is. I'm talking back, you know, there's a lot of history there.
He was a big man in a lot of ways.
In a lot of ways, yeah.
I studied with Reggie. He just stood there like a mountain. You still couldn't hit him.
Could you tell me your name?
Yeah, my name is Don Cady.
And tell me how you came to know Reg.
Well, back in the 60s, shortly after Reggie got his black belt from Tabata, he had a school in Monument Square. It was like on the 4th or 5th floor, Monument Square. And I began studying karate then as a white belt and started from the ground up. And I studied with Reggie for close to 15 years. And for Reggie, I ran a school in Biddeford for about 3 years. And I taught the credit course at USM for 2 or 3 years. So we go back a long way.
Characterize what Reg was like as a teacher.
I think every student that will sit in this chair will tell you that he would bring more out of you than you ever thought you had.
What did he do for you?
He made me do more than I ever thought I could. He made me work real hard, be proud. We used to, after some of his classes, we had a Volkswagen, and it was so strange. I would come out of that class, and at times I would have to use my blue jeans to pick up my foot to put it on the brake. That's how hard he worked us out. He would make us do all 5 he-ins, one right after another, and then tell us, well, if you'd done them right, you couldn't have done more than one because you didn't focus. And we all shared the same things with him. Throughout the years, he made a lot of great black belts, a lot of wonderful karate people. But more than that, Reggie taught us a lot more than actual self-defense. He taught us respect, taught us Budo, the martial way, made us learn the history of karate, and so that we really knew a lot more about a martial art than most people ever will. And in my travels, I visited many martial arts schools. I've met many men who have big schools, lots of trophies in the windows, and are black belts in 15 different styles and weapons and everything. And with Reggie, I don't think you could never learn enough to be a black belt in all the different things. And we all learned weapons, but we barely learned the weapons. And his philosophy was, when you make black belt, then you're ready to be a student and really learn. And we studied with Tabata, who has come up frequently out of Boston. And Reggie had connections with all of the great martial arts people from Japan. Ochai and the guys from down in New York and New Jersey would come up to our tournaments and things. We had a chance to work out with them, which most people who study karate all their lives would never get to work with the people like that. They were all the Japanese 5th, 6th Dan people, the real JKA people. So it was wonderful.
So probably the biggest thing that you learned is discipline and self-discipline, I would think.
Yeah, certainly.
Describe that for me and how you carry that on through your life and pass it on to other people.
Well, fortunately, I learned some self-control. I've never had to use martial arts myself as self-defense. I've worked part-time as a deputy sheriff on the street, worked in the jail as a medical officer, and I've never had to strike or kick anybody, and have learned to have the confidence that I was never threatened by any of them. I knew that if it came down to it, I could defend myself, so I never had to push them, and I was always able to give them a way out so that the confrontation never had to take place. My children, I have 5 children, and they all came to classes with me. I have a son who was a first Dan brown belt. He's now a police officer. And all my children learn martial arts, and they still talk about it to this day. We get together and talk about going to class with.
So he not only was he a teacher, but he taught you to be a teacher as well.
He taught every one of his students to be a teacher, because you never knew when he was going to ask you to come up to the head of the class and teach that. Or a new person would come into the class and he would ask you to go over in a corner and work with them and show them the basic stances. So everybody in his class was a teacher.
Beyond the martial arts, did you have a personal relationship with Reg?
Oh yeah, we got together a lot when I was here. Then we moved away to Florida for a while. And when we came back, I saw him a few times. And recently, we have had what we call the Tuesday with Reggie. Every Tuesday afternoon, 5, 6 of us, never less than 4, would get together and go to see him at his house. And we would spend 2 or 3 hours there with him just talking. And we would all get into our individual conversations and talk about all kinds of different things. And he would just sit there beaming, and he would chime in and get involved in a conversation. But mostly you could just see him sitting there just enjoying having a few people around. And we were quite proud because it was an individual invitation thing. It was this little group of people that did it. So we really enjoyed that. And
what do you think that Reg's legacy will be?
Well, there's a lot of people walking around here that are his former students who have learned a lot from Reggie. Tony Fournier runs a very successful school, and he is one of his students. Bruce Barker ran a successful school up in Orono. There's a lot of great schools around the state, and most of them came from Reggie. And most of the the first probably 10 years that karate was even in the state of Maine were only from Reggie. He was the catalyst for martial arts in the state of Maine.
If I asked you to sort of fill in the blank for me and say Reggie was this, give me 3 different examples of what you think Reggie was.
Reggie was the consummate Renaissance man. He was the old Japanese masters always believed that you had to learn the violence of martial arts, kendo, sword fighting, jiu-jitsu, all of the martial arts, and at the same time had to be able to leave that and go to a tea ceremony and be gentle, to cry at a poem. Reggie was that kind of a person. I think that would sum Reggie up as a Renaissance man. His accomplishments are staggering to think of all of the things he's done. And he's done so well at all of them. So he's been a master of all of that he tried to do.
Hi, my name's Tony Fournier. I came to know Reggie Groff through my first time taking karate lessons back at King Junior High School, when it was still King Junior. We had an opportunity to either play crab soccer or do karate, and I've always been interested in doing karate lessons. So back in 1972, Tony Steinman was teaching at King Junior High School, taught a 6-week karate course, and started karate back then at that 6-week course. Played baseball, took some time off. I didn't make Babe Ruth baseball, and my father said, "Hey, you want to continue with karate lessons?" I said, "Absolutely." So there was only one place to go, and that was to see Reg.
Excellent. Describe your educational experience with Reg and what it was like, and characterize it for me.
I think the best part about learning from him was his artistic side of the martial arts, and how he always tried to see things past where everybody else was at the time. Some of his concepts were definitely much more further ahead than the stoic martial arts, the stagnant martial arts, if you want to call it that, the rigid part of it. But my training with him was absolutely fantastic. It was always one of the most fun things to do, was always go to karate classes. And when you're a young kid and you don't know where you are in lifetime, I think that he provided a good male role model for a lot of young guys to follow. And you know, I appreciate everything that he's done, because through his impact, it's given me my career that I'm in now. It's given me the opportunity to be able to succeed in things that you know, has to be due to his diligence and still staying with martial arts and teaching karate and putting up with a person like me.
You have a significant number of students.
Yes.
How would you say that your teaching style was impacted by the way that you were taught by Reg?
One, I think, was to always approach things with a sense of humor. He always had a great sense of humor on the floor. He always had a smile on his face when he came in. He was just a good-natured giant. And you know, that's the type of thing that you have to portray. You know, you didn't cross lines with him. You know, you also knew that too. So if you always did it that way, I mean, that was kind of the thing that was going on. You know, you just knew there's a certain line you didn't cross, but the rest of the time, he was a gentle giant that would teach you anything you wanted to know.
Can you remember crossing that line? Can you tell me a story?
I never would cross that line.
You never ever?
Never. I learned from other people's mistakes very, very well, who would try to go and you know, do things, but I wouldn't cross that line. That wasn't something. The other thing that I learned from him too is he always put himself in the position, and he said this to me, he says, you know, respect the Japanese but don't worship them in the martial arts, and I've always taken that to heart. That was one of the greatest stories that I always remembered, is, you know, you respect them, don't give them that much. You know, and he says you don't ever want to kowtow down to them. You always want to keep your head high. So I keep that lesson with me all the time. And I even remember that when I had to fight the Japanese, where everybody else was getting creamed because everybody was listening to everybody say, "Oh, the Japanese will kill you. The Japanese will kill you. They'll do this. They'll do this." That just rang true. You know, they put their pants on just like you do. You know, don't think that they're any better than you are. So.
Can you share what you think maybe the best piece of advice you ever got from Reg was?
Yes, well, it was actually a teaching piece of advice. I was having problems teaching, and he says, when you talk to the group, talk to them like they're one individual. He said, just do that. And he said, then you won't be so worried about looking all over the place and then worrying about every little thing that's going on. But he said, just talk to the group as one individual. I think that was a great piece of advice. It definitely helped me in my teaching and helped me become a much better teacher right after that first piece of advice he ever gave me. And that's kind of led to the career that I have, the wife that I have. I always thought Joanne was just an absolutely fantastic person too. I had to go out and marry a nurse. And you know, it was kind of a nice thing is that when Reg first went in for his heart condition, it was my wife that was taking care of him in the hospital. So,
wow.
You know, so our worlds intersect. And then when my father had to go in for kidney removal, it was Joanne that took care of him. So I always thought that that was how the world goes around that way.
Wow. You talked about his advice to you to speak to each student as though they were, speak to the group as though they were one person.
Yes.
Did you feel that in his teaching? Did you always feel like he was talking to you specifically?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Share that with me.
I always take things to heart when somebody says something about anything in the martial arts. If I'm in that group, I just always learn that, you know, when they're talking, they probably are talking to you. So just listen to those messages and then pull as much out of it as possible. I think that was one of the biggest things that I got from it, and that's what I try to teach everybody else to do too. And try to remember where you came from. I think that was another big thing that I always learned from him. How to raise successful kids was another one too.
Let's play fill in the blanks for a second.
Sure.
If you were going to say Reg Groff was, and you could fill in that blank 3 different ways, say that for me.
Reg Groff was a father figure to me when I didn't have one. Reg Groff was a great man, and I'm going to miss him dearly. You know, even though we didn't get a chance to see each other in the last few years as much as we'd like to. You know, I just knew his presence was around. He was always free to come into my karate school. And, you know, and his impact, I have to say thanks to him, because without him and without having taken me to the direction and giving me the confidence that I have in my lifetime, and providing me with the martial arts training, like I said, I'd probably never have the career that I got now. I'd never have the wife that I have now, the 2 children that I have now, and it all just starts from that basic building of a 13-year-old boy into somebody very, very, you know, thankful for being with him at that time.
Outstanding.
Thank you.
Well, my name's Jeffrey Campbell. I've come to know Reg 2 different times in my life. One as a kid and one as an adult. As a kid, I grew up next door to Tony, the gentleman who was just on with you, and was interested somewhat in karate, but not that much because I was a bear, an ox, and I always felt I was too strong for my size and didn't want to hurt anybody. And Reg couldn't get through to me that I could do that the other way. So I always watched Tony grow up and get all the direction he got, and I also didn't have a father. And Reg was one of those guys you look at and just go, wow, he's the type of guy you want to role model yourself after. You want to take as much that he can give to you and use for your own morals and values. So it helps. And then I didn't see him for maybe 8 to 10 years. And I met him on the streets of Portland one day. And we got to talking and went and had lunch and chatted. And he was always doing such good things with kids. And I've always enjoyed working with children. That's what I do now. Again, I left, didn't see him for 4 or 5 years. I went out of the country to work. And I came back and I met him at a Deering Ice Cream, having coffee. And he asked me what I was doing. I said, I'm working at the Maine Youth Center. He goes, you know I work there? I go, oh. And he had worked there in the previous. And he gave me a lot of insight on how to work with kids. I mean, I had just come out of nuclear power plants and places like that. I didn't know how to work with a kid. And sat down and gave me some of his philosophy as how he deals with people and how he inspires them. And it allowed me to use tools that I didn't know I had. just by using personal experiences and setting little goals, and being able to go back and talk to him the next week if it didn't work, because he was always there. And it seemed like my first, you know. Did you? Yeah. I mean, there was a whole group. There was a retired state police officer, a couple of old construction guys, and it was a good little group of people. And I was the youngest. I was in my 30s, and everybody was 15, 20, 25 years older. So I felt like, oh, this is a great place to be. I'll learn a lot of things here. And I took the opportunity to learn. And Reggie was always, made himself available if you had a question for me. I mean, I wasn't in touch with him real personally with the children and things. In fact, today, I hate saying this, I found out his daughter Debbie works for me where I work. She's one of my nurses. And I didn't know it was her dad until today. And that blew me away, because she's a great lady, real compassionate. You can see Reggie through and through in her. Just the way she deals with our kids. And we have some really rough and tough type kids, and she never gets flustered. She's always cool and calm. It's really nice. Now I know where she gets it. It's going to be a little easier for me to understand when she might do something that I might not consider security conscious, but the right thing to do.
Can you think of any specific pieces of advice that he gave you that really resonate through day and day?
Inspire. Always inspire people. Let people know you care, and be there if they ask for support. I mean, he was constantly saying, if you need something, get a hold of me. Just get a hold of me if you need to talk about it. And he always inspired people. That everybody that I've seen that ever touched him, he inspired. Either with motivating through karate or personal issues that they couldn't get through, be it emotional, physical, psychological. He always seemed to have an answer. So it's very inspiring, and that's what he leaves me with, is inspire other people so that you too can be inspired again and again and again and again.
Didn't you go to Deering to do his writing? Isn't that where he used to sit and write? Or that was his...
If he was alone, he'd sit and write, but most of the time, I tell you, he was always with the
chatting.
Did you ever listen to or look at much of the stuff that Reg?
No, I didn't. I never did. I was always one of these guys in a hurry, sit and chat for a few minutes and get as much as I can from him, and never had a whole lot of time. And I regret that with a lot of things. But with Reggie, he never made you feel like you were rushing with him anyway. He'd still give you advice and let you on your way real quick. But I never did, and I've learned a lot just in the past day, just today alone. I've learned a lot about Reggie that I didn't know, which is good, and I'll probably find out some more.
Give me a nutshell, 15 or 20 words, who Reg Groff was.
Reg Groff was a inspirational, motivating, intelligent human being who cared and had compassion for everybody around him and everything around him.
What would you say you would miss the most?
His calmness, his at peace with things. He just always seemed to be relaxed, and nothing flustered Reggie. It just didn't seem to bother him, and in a way that it would make other people either snarl or snap. He'd think the process through and just be calm about it. Thank you, Reg Groff, for giving me the opportunity to know the little that I knew about you, which was large.
My name's Arnie Beck. Started karate probably back in, I think it was around 80, 81. My girlfriend got me a Christmas gift, because I kept going around, all the time, and she thought it would be kind of interesting to put me into karate. So I said, the only way I'm doing it is if you do it. So we kind of went together and been with him ever since.
Tell me what the experience was like.
When I first started, it was, I was pretty much thrown in because I was a big kid, so I was kind of thrown in with all the black belts. So I think I learned fast. Took my lumps and enjoyed every minute of it. I mean, it was hard, extremely hard, but it was well worth it. I think, like I said, being big and only being a white belt, going up all against all the top black belts at the time, I think I learned a lot more that way. You know, plus Reggie's teaching, which really helped me a lot.
Tell me about Reggie as a teacher. What was he like?
Very, it's really hard to say. He was very commanding. I mean, you knew he was there, that's for sure. But he did it in a way that you were never scared. He never looked at you like he was going to beat on you or anything like that. He was always very just a commanding person up there, talking to you and getting you to learn things and getting you to understand things, rather than just showing you a move and walking away. He explained it, which made a big difference.
Can you think of a particular sort of episode where you were working with him where, like, can you give me a story, tell me something specific that you remember that happened that really stuck with you?
I think one thing I've always remembered was he used his 1-inch punch on me. I do remember that very well. He, from 1 inch away, hit me and managed to knock the wind out of me completely and put a red spot on my front and on the back. It's always stuck with me for as long as I can remember. That's the focus of it. He just focused it in, and it was amazing. I mean, I lost my breath before. You get hit in the stomach and you lose your breath and you're but this was just like a and it was back. It was the weirdest thing. You lost it and it was right back immediately, but then you were just like a little lightheaded and, and you know, kind of like a little woozy for a second. But
so
I think that was
no question that he knew exactly what he was doing.
Exactly, yes. That was amazing. I mean, that was probably one of the stories I always remember with Reggie, you know.
Can you think of anything that you may have learned with Reg that you still carry on today, either through discipline or through teaching other people, or anything you can think of that he shared with you that you still...
Everything. I mean, he just, he was kind of a mentor. I mean, he really helped me a lot. I mean, you know, he helped me grow up to be who I am today, in his own way. I mean, we didn't see each other a lot, except for maybe class or whatnot, but through karate and through everything else, I mean, he really definitely changed my life and made it better, I thought. And I've tried to carry on what he's taught, you know, throughout my regular everyday life and, you know, in my teaching when I do teach. It's amazing. I mean, he taught us a lot, taught everybody a lot, not just me.
Can you give me sort of a before and after, you before taking classes with Reg and before spending time with Reg, and you now? What differences are there in you as a person?
I think I'm more focused on a lot of things. I think I'm better mentally prepared for a lot of things. It was just, you know, having him teaching you so much, and not just karate. I mean, a lot of different things, you know. I mean, we talked here and there. We were never extremely close, but I hope I was one of his, you know, better students, and hope I was around long enough. I've been with him 20-some odd years, so he did teach me quite a bit. But I think I'm more sure of myself than I ever was before. I know he helped me with that. Made me feel a little bit more, you know, like I can do whatever I need to do.
If you were going to say thank you, Reg Groff, for, what would you say?
I would probably say thank you for everything that you've taught me, everything I've experienced through your classes, and just for yourself, you know, being a good friend. And, you know, we're going to miss him a lot. I'm going to miss him a lot. I mean, there's everybody. I mean, there's a lot of people that he's touched throughout how many years of teaching that it's never going to be the same. I mean, class is never going to be the same. And, you know, if I ever go to a karate class now, it's going to be missing something. Even though I know he's going to be there, it's not going to be quite the same as it was. I mean, he's the only person that really had an influence to the point where you wanted to do it for him. I mean, here's a man putting you in pain half the time, and you wanted to do it. How weird is that? You know? So I do say thank you.
Outstanding. Anything else you'd like to share?
My best wishes to the family. you know, they've been through a lot this year, and I feel very sorry that everything's happened to them, and I hope they get through it in time. You know, you never always get through it, but you will, a little bit here and there. But I do have my condolences for the family.
Well, I'm Jerry Keene, and I'm 46 years old, and when I was 14 years old, my sister was very good friends with Tony Steinman, who was one of Reggie's top students. And Tony used to come to our house and meditate underneath the tree in the backyard. And he got to know me some, and he made a prophecy that someday I would continue on in karate. And it's a little strange to say, but he referred to his own leaving this world in reference to that, which he did. He passed away. Anyways, Tony talked my mom into taking me to karate class. So I went to my first class, and it was Federal Street, and it was an old gym on the east end of Portland, and it was right up above a boxing gym. You were talking about boxers, fun. And you went up over this long set of stairs, and I went with my mom, and I was really scared. And I went to this class, and it was this big room, and Reggie was just, we were frightened of him. I mean, he was just an awesome presence. So I did this whole class, and I can distinctly remember that we went to leave, and it was sort of on the east end of town, and in those days that was kind of a rough area a little bit. And Joanne had been in the class with Reggie, and my mom made a comment to the effect that, gee, I hope nothing happens on the way home. And Joanne came over and said, it's okay, Mrs. Keene. He knows karate now. He'll protect you. And my mom started laughing. She said, one class. Oh, yes, that's all he needs. So that's how I got into karate.
What you searching for, guys? Okay, can you wait a little while? Thank you. They had a necklace in here they were playing with, and it came undone, and rings went everywhere.
Oh, wow.
Gold rings, they went everywhere.
Oh, my word.
So, you go home from your first karate class.
Yeah.
And obviously you decided to go back, huh?
Yeah. I went with my friend Jeff Levy, and I went on and off all through high school, and then kind of got out of it for a long time, and then as fate would have it, I ran into Reggie at Deering Ice Cream, and we had we developed a club there. We'd all hang out and drink coffee and philosophize and argue and so forth, and I came back into classes and continued. So I've on and off gone for years, and as of late, we were having class in the cellar of my house, and we did that for a long time because we didn't have a dojo here in Portland. And also going over to Reggie's house, and a bunch of guys getting together and talking for hours, and he loved that sort of thing. And now
Were you part of the Tuesdays with Reg?
I was part of Tuesdays with Reg, yeah.
Tell me about Tuesdays with Reg.
Tuesdays with Reg. Well, Reg got some guys together that he felt would relate well with each other, and we talked and socialized and had coffee and for hours, and we talked about everything known to man, I think, probably. People's experiences in the military, their travels, metaphysical beliefs, you name it. And Reggie would sit there and listen and listen. And once in a while he'd interject a comment. And he loved it if we'd get into a conflict or an argument or, that sort of thing. And we did that right up to within a couple weeks. So, yeah.
Where do you think Reg's drive came from? Where did he get that kind of drive? What do you think fed that kind of drive?
Well, I think that he was very artistic and a talented person. And, when you have a lot of talent, it seeks expression. And I was always amazed at his versatility. I mean, he was, to my mind, the best martial artist I've ever seen. And at the same time, he wrote prolifically, he did art, he collected. He was a real family man. He just spent lots of time with his family and traveled all over the place, and always had a project going.
do you think you learned? If you were to say you learned 3 specific things from Reg Groff, what do you think the 3 primary things you learned from him are?
Well, first I would say that in terms of influence on me as a boy and as a young man and later on, I think he's the person that's had the greatest influence of anybody. I learned courage. I learned to face things I was nervous about or afraid of. I learned to go beyond what I thought were my limitations, to transcend myself. And that's a painful thing to learn, but he knew how to teach it. And I learned, well, he really, I was very shy as a young boy and young man growing up. And just the fact that he had an interest in me and took the time to talk to me and all of that, I just really feel that he did a lot for my self-esteem.
Did he touch you? Did he really get inside your head?
Yeah.
Tell me about that.
Well, lately, and for a while now actually, it's hard to picture karate without him. This is a person that when we'd hear him coming down the stairs and we were in karate class, we'd suddenly start putting out the greatest effort of our lives. I would just wait to be seen and hope that I would be doing things the way he wanted. And sometimes I wouldn't be because I'd be so nervous and trying too hard. But he instilled awe in people. And when he came into a karate class, no matter if people were kind of, not real full of energy or whatever, when he came into the class, everyone gave it their all. Yeah. To me, he was the very figure of a man, what a man should be. And I don't mean this, I know we live in the new age and all that, but he was a very powerful man. And I remember, like, if a kid was real shy and inhibited, and maybe they had problems at home or whatever it was, but it would come out in karate class sooner or later. And he would always be able to find something positive to develop in that kid and to give strength and sometimes just plain old force the person to get up in front of everybody and let go of their fears. And that's a great gift. Tremendous thing for a young person to have the study of karate and learn discipline and respect and all the values that go with it. And I think that Reggie really lived those values. He respected people, he was kind, he was gentle, all the things that martial arts teach. He really did embody that. So that's what he taught me.
If you were going to say thank you, Reg Groff. Thank you, Reg Groff, for...
Boy, that's a hard question. There's so many things, Well, I'm still in karate, and we're even forming a new class in honor of Reggie. I'd say in many ways he gave me direction and something special. Karate is something special in my life that I feel good about, and I've passed on to other people. And also just a really good friend. All the hours we spent talking and having coffee and going places. Like I said, he's the most, I think, really been the biggest influence on me of anybody. And probably a lot of people here tonight feel that way. So thank you for everything.
Yeah, I'm Beverly Hubbard.
Wonderful.
Munjoy Hill.
Take it from there, Diane.
And you said that your relationship with Reggie Groff and the Groff family goes back to the 60s?
To the 60s at the...
How did that begin?
When he and George Stanton, of course, ran the neighborhood association. And I went to work there. I lived right on the next street. I had 6 children. I was struggling just like Reggie and all of us there. So I started being an outreach worker and going into homes and seeing what problems people had and seeing if I could help them out, going back to Reggie and George. they were always bucking the system. You know, the politics and City Hall, and so we had a lot of kind of trouble, you know, with the city of Portland. They weren't very appreciative, but we hung it out for quite a few years. And then, of course, during that, my children became friends with their children, and my son Michael and little Reggie, we used to say, Reggie the Third, are like brothers, and they used to travel to the islands together and treasure hunt, you know, look for different things out in Casco Bay, and they played with that castle and those soldiers that are set up in the other room, and they played with those and talked those things, and and Michael, my son, will be here tonight. He just had to, he couldn't come until tonight, but he'll be here for this. And today I came with my 2 daughters and my friend, and it's just like an old friend, you know, like we lost.
What was life like in that neighborhood?
Life was good. Life was good to us. Life was good with the Groffs too. You know, we were kind of the middle class, I think. You know, we weren't the poorest, we weren't the richest, but we were in there hanging our own, just like they were. You know, working hard-working families, putting the kids through school and extracurricular. As you know, Reggie was so involved with karate, and then little Reggie being involved in the movies and what he's doing, and they're just a wonderful family. And then the Salvation Army, of course, I have a story to tell about his sister.
Please share that.
Her name Joanne? No. What's the sister's name, guys? She worked for the Salvation Army. I just got done talking with her out there.
Do you know her name?
And anyway, she caught my...
Helen?
Yes, Helen. Well, we lived next door to the Salvation Army on Cedar Street, and of course they're very involved in the Salvation Army. And my daughter and her friend were over there, and I guess they got caught smoking in the bathroom by Reggie's sister. So she took care of them, and we just reminisced about it out in the other room. If you needed it, I took care of it, she says. And we've never gotten over that 40 years ago. She's kind of put the kids in their place, but Reggie was more laid back. And George Stanton, you know, he was a great friend. And I know he passed away about a year ago. And that was, I know Reggie, big Reggie took it very hard. They were just like brothers. And maybe now they're all together looking down on us and talking politics. And
Also nice memories to share. Is there anything else you'd like to share with the family?
They're a wonderful family. Of course, Reggie and Debbie I know the best. Andy was young. And then we, you know, all grew up. Everyone grew up and all that. Oh my goodness, there's my doctor. Can't be. And, excuse me.
Could you give us a sense of Reggie's personality?
Well, if you didn't know him, you might think he was grumpy. You know, he was kind of rough. He could come across, his voice could come across rough, but he was a pussycat inside. But I think a lot of people misunderstood his gruffness for maybe not liking you, but it wasn't like that at all. He was a pussycat underneath, but he did come across rough. He had that rough, and he had that look about him that was gruff, but he wasn't. No, they were wonderful. I can't believe they're both gone. I opened the paper Friday morning and saw his picture looking at me, and it's just something else gone out of your life that was a big part of my life at one time. And because I saw him after he was sick, I'd see him at Shop and Save or something, say hi to him, but it's just...
Is there any characteristic that you will remember most about him? What is that? There's something that he has demonstrated.
No, not really, just his gruffness, but underneath how he was a very nice gentleman, and he really had a heart. But he came across as, and he was a big man, so, you know, besides having that height to him and that weight to him, with his voice too, you kind of, took you a minute, you know, but he was wonderful. He was wonderful. He had a wonderful family. And thank you, and shut that off, darling.
You got it.
My name is Peter Turner. back in the late 50s, I was in the Children's Theater of Portland, and that's when it was on Chadwick Street, and Reggie was a part of that, and I think I was in several plays with Reggie. I remember I have several vivid memories, but I think the most vivid was when he was going into the Marine Corps. And there was a lot of excitement about that, a lot of discussion about the fact that he was going to be going in that. He was very happy and very proud that he was going into the Marines at the time. It's almost 50 years, I guess, you know. So we've run into each other from time to time. We used to run into Joanne and Reggie at Shop and Save on Forest Avenue. Visited with them once at their home on Munjoy Hill.
Could you tell us a little bit about what your first impressions were of Reggie when you met him?
He was a big guy, but he was a very nice guy and very protective. He was a real hard worker, and there was a lot of work to putting on a play, you know, moving the scenery and all of that. And he had the brute force to be able to do, you know, a lot of that. And yet he was still, you know, on the stage. He was just an all-around, he was everywhere.
So he worked behind the scenes? So he was right there in front, too.
In front. And in the summertime, when we traveled in the trailer, the side of the trailer was an apron, and it would open out, you know, and you'd have to crank it down to lower it, and had a guide wire, and Reggie used to do that. He used to lower that apron. I was pretty pint-sized at the time, and you know, that was not a job that I would go anywhere near, you know. So, but Reggie took it all in good strides, you know. So, yeah.
Can you give us a sense of? I mean, you're talking 50 years ago.
Yeah.
What was he like as an actor, and how did his enthusiasm carry over onto other people?
He would work with other people on their parts, coaching somewhat, if I recall correctly. He was very supportive. He was very supportive of everybody that was in the theater. He was like the big brother, you know. I mean, Chuck Dowdy, Carol Dowdy. Chuck was the director at the time when I was involved in it, and but and so Chuck was the authority figure on there. He was kind of like the big brother, you know, the fellow who had been there, been through it all, and knew the ropes and would take care of people. Yeah.
Did he help launch any rising stars?
Gee, I don't know if there were any rising stars out of that group, you know. I remember Amanda Ball. I didn't know Amanda Ball, but she had been in the Children's Theater just before I was, and she went to New York City. It was a Rockette or something. Yeah, her sister Diane was in the theater with, you know, at the time I was there. But he seemed to know them all, you know, and yeah.
How do you compare the environment of the theater then and what he was involved in, what you're both involved in, to where it is now?
See, I've lost track of where it is now, so I don't know. It was, I've gone by the place on Chadwick Street, and I've always been amazed at how small it really is. It's like a little garage and everything, and yet that's where we used to do all the rehearsals and paint all the the scenery and prepare all the stuff. And I was involved in some other theater groups. It was before the Lyric Theater was formed, but I was in the Portland Players for a while and everything. But I think by that time Reggie had moved into the Marine Corps, and I remember seeing him when he got out, and he was into the karate thing, and he had started his karate school. So I would run into him every once in a while, but it was it was always a pleasure to see Reggie, and he was just a very warm, loving, giving guy. Yeah.
Did he influence you at all in any way?
Probably, but I couldn't. I couldn't put a finger on it at this point. Except I always considered him a friend. Even though he's more of an acquaintance. We didn't see each other all that often, but he was one that I would have counted as a friend.
Is there anything else you want to share for his family, or any other?
I know that he was always very proud of his son Reggie and his theater, his directory, his film efforts. He would talk about him quite a bit. And the other thing, when we visited with him, I remember his telling me how he and his kids were spending so much time with these toy soldiers, and how he was making them and painting them and creating all these different battle scenes and everything. And he was quite proud of that, and quite proud of the involvement of his kids in that. Yeah. But it's one of those things where you just lose touch after a while, and we did. Yeah.
My name is Harlan Baker.
Good afternoon, Harlan. Yes. And can you tell us how and when did you actually meet Reggie Groff?
Well, I'll tell you, I don't remember exactly when I actually met Reggie. I can tell you when I became aware of him. And I actually didn't meet him or get to talk to him until much later. See, I arrived in Portland, Maine, March of 1970, and shortly afterwards I found myself involved in what was called the Model Cities program. And Reggie was at the East End, Portland East End Action Center, PIAC. And that's when I became aware of him. And the one thing I remember is that in the closing days of the Model Cities program, which was around 72, 73, he put out a series of newspapers in which he illustrated them with stills from motion pictures, from classic motion pictures. And I remember reading the newspaper. In fact, I noticed that there's a number of issues that are here today, and I haven't seen those issues in 30 years, because it was 30 years ago when the Model Cities program closed down. So I do remember seeing Reggie there quite often. Then the next time I remember very distinctly, again it was 30 years ago, I went out to the beach, and this was Sunday, it was a hot summer day, and I think it was probably Crescent or Scarborough, one of those two beaches. And I look out into the water, and there is Reggie in his karate outfit with about 20 to 30 of his students waist deep in water, practicing their karate moves in unison. And I remember that very, very well.
That must have been a beautiful sight.
It was. I never expected to see people practicing karate waist deep in water at the beach, but apparently it had something to do about the resistance of the water would help in terms of the moves you make for karate. But I actually try to think when I actually started talking with Reggie quite a bit. It was years later. and I think it was when I was substitute teaching, and his son came in with a movie. He was showing the class Fort Apache, with John Wayne, and I became aware of the fact that that Reggie had a collection of toy soldiers, thousands of toy soldiers. And actually, this is something that I was very happy to know about, because my mother had always been harping at me, but why, I collected toy soldiers. And what do you see in those toy soldiers? Don't you have enough? Don't you have enough toy soldiers by now? And I'd say, Mom, there's a man in Portland by the name of Reginald Groff. He has thousands of soldiers. His collection would put mine to shame. I'll never have enough. So that's basically what he
Do you know why he collected toy soldiers?
I don't. I don't know why. I have no idea what got him started, but I know he converted a lot of his figures, because at the time, when I assume when he started collecting, there was only they didn't have the kind of variety of soldiers that you have today that you could buy, and so he just converted his own.
And his son Reggie has some of these lying in his office.
I've seen them many times. Hundreds of thousands of I don't think people appreciate toy soldiers today as much as they should. They really are something that will inspire somebody's imagination, and I think that's great.
Is there anything that you'd like to share with the family? Any other story or thought or message?
Well, I guess I'd say that it's wonderful that a man like Reggie could have such diverse interest, that he was active in community affairs through model cities, that he was active in the theater or something. I didn't realize until I read the notices that he had been as active in theater as that he had such diverse interest and participation in the community, that I think that's a wonderful thing to leave a community. It's a wonderful legacy to leave a community, that you could have been involved in so many different areas and be very creative at the same time.
Can you give us, just in your knowledge of the East End stuff that he was involved in, can you give us a sense of his passion for causes and disciplines and?
Oh boy, I don't know if I actually could, because at the time that I was coming into the program, it was winding down. But I think if you look at the newspapers, just read the papers. I haven't seen them in 30 years, but read the papers. It's starting to come back to me.
I looked through a couple of them
you
just a few
will
minutes
see
ago.
how he would go after the powers that be for basically ignoring the inner city. And so yes, I think one would have to have a lot of passion to be able to go after and write that. And I'm starting to remember now what the program was like now. It was sometimes it's like hitting your head against the wall, but I remember now the newspapers, and that was Portland East Action Center.
You spoke about.
It's no longer there, by the way.
Images, film images.
Oh yes, the film characters, but they had their own. They have their own dialogue. It wasn't the dialogue from the movie. It was like Robin Hood saying, "You don't have to be a Robin Hood to fight injustice," right? And there's a couple of others.
Is that Errol Flynn?
Errol Flynn, absolutely.
There's
Errol Flynn.
Robin Hood.
Yes.
What a powerful symbol.
And as far as I'm concerned, there's no other. Anybody else who played Robin Hood never could hold a candle to Errol Flynn. And one of the things that is interesting now is that the East End Action Center, that building is gone. The building is gone. It was right next to the Boys and Girls Club, opposite the Portland High School, and it was torn down. And now they've built an extension of the Boys and Girls Club. But I remember going by it many times into that building.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Ron Palmer.
Give me an idea how long you knew Reg. When did you meet him?
Oh, like I said, back in, he was involved with the Children's Theater, and I was trying to get involved in it. And I can't remember the exact, probably I was 9, 10 or something. He was 4 years older than I was, so. And they had the Children's Theater up at the Western Promenade. They had a place, I don't remember the name of the street, the first one down from there, but that's where he was playing the part of the giant then, even being, you know, he was really big for a kid then. He was, and of course after that, I run into him many places as time went on, you know. So, and his best friend George Stratton lived 2 houses from me on Bradford Street. See, so of course, I guess the Longfellow Restaurant is where we all started to congregate, you know, probably in the late 50s there.
He's talked a lot about the Longfellow Restaurant.
Yep.
Tell me about the Longfellow Restaurant.
The Longfellow Restaurant is, it's right it's where H&R Block just closed up a log. I don't know if they're even still there. Maybe H&R Block is still there. It was right there where H&R Block, beside Joe's Smoke Shop, to the left of Joe's Smoke Shop, right on the corner. They had Patronelli's Restaurant and Longfellow Restaurant, and they were right beside each other, I guess. But the Longfellow Restaurant was to the right. The little street is down to the back of Joe's Smoke Shop's parking lot there.
What year do you think you're talking about?
Oh, on Longfellow Restaurant is the late 50s. Late 50s. I was, in 56, I was 55, and in 57, 50, you know, I was 15, and in 57, I was 16 in August of each year. So, and I went in there quite a lot, because he was, at that time, he was 19 or 20 probably, so at that time. Him and George met in there a lot with, you know, well, with Joni there, something that's, you know, they used to be in there a lot.
So tell me about Reg at 19 or so. Give me an indication of what he was like when he was 19.
Well, he ran around with us, and believe it or not, even then, even though he could be aggressive if he wanted to, he still had the same type of personality. You know, I wouldn't bother anybody unless they bothered me, you know. If somebody bothered him, because he, you know, he could go on the hog if he had to, you know. As they used to use that word a lot back in those days. But he was always, you know, talking about interest in the, you know, in the theater and stuff like that back then. Still, you know, for quite a while. Kept talking about he was going to try for this script and try for this different thing, you know, all the time. But,
he's quite a movie buff, huh?
Oh yeah, he wanted. He for a long while he was trying to get in it. He didn't. I forget the last time I seen him when he said, "Oh, I'm going to try this one, and that's it. I'm not going to go any further." Like he come down from some place over the old Civic building or something. I run into him. He was in a suit, and he had some script he had tried out for, and he didn't get it or something. He was trying for. And he said, well, I'll probably give it up after this one. I don't make this one. I'll probably give it up because.
Did you do children's theater with him eventually?
Oh, I get down there and I tried out for it, but I didn't stick with it either. No, I didn't stick with it. Because I was in plays in school and things like that, but I didn't. You know, I didn't have this. He really wanted to push a career in acting, you know, and stuff. And I didn't have that in me. Back then I was in the, well, I probably was one of the ones that got him interested in fighting a lot, you know, really. Because I was, you know, Olympic lifter, I'm an ex-Olympic lifter. And because I was an ex-amateur boxer, I had gyms for boxing and everything. So, and, back then I had judo books and all this. I introduced him to some of these books before he even started himself. And some of these moves and all these different things, you know, we used to talk about it. I got him a little bit interested in doing that stuff. And the next thing I knew, we went down to Massachusetts and come back, you know, and had the black belt. And he had quite a few of us. This Wayne Mitchell and a lot of us that used to hang around. He used to come up there and see him a lot too. He won the 3 years in a row Thanksgiving Day Trophy at Portland High School there, Wayne Mitchell. Yeah, he was one of the group. He used to run around with us all the time. And,
pretty much it seems like everything he did with a passion. Can you sort of talked about that?
Oh yeah, geez, he was always interested in fight movies and war movies. Man, anytime I went to his house, we always had to sit and watch that Gunga Din. I like that anyway. Yeah, I know, he's got that, still got it to this day, that Gunga Din, so. Oh yeah, he's always, and not just interested in, like I said, that part of it. Anybody like me, because I had the reputation for being a, you know, in the streets of street fighter and all that. So he liked anybody that was interested in anything to do with fighting. You know. Well, it was more of an art to him than actually fighting. You know, so.
What can you think of a specific story, maybe that something that maybe happened, you know, when a bunch of you were hanging out? Give me an idea of how old you were and how old he was.
Well, I could tell you, he could get, well, we had another friend called Leroy Stover that, because he didn't know him at the time. This is how he got to know him. It was all up to the Songo Locks. We used to have parties up there. And we had, you know, bonfires and everything. We used to have big parties up there. And because the Stover showed up with a few other guys, football players, the ex-football players in Portland and all that. And Stover was a little bit aggressive, trying, I'm not going to do this, I'm not going to back down. Geez, I had a hell of a time getting ready, because I knew Stover real well, and he said the wrong thing to Reggie. Reggie was more going to get him. Stover wasn't backing down, and I knew he was going to get, you know, he was going to get killed by Reggie. He kept it up. So it took me a while to quiet him down. Reggie was really stomping. Really did. He said, well, he's asking for it and all this stuff, because Stover was getting this stubborn attitude about he wasn't going to back down from anybody and all this and that. And I just kind of wanted to make sure that I had a whole time holding him back from back at that time getting it, because Stover said the wrong thing to him. I'll tell you, that really set him off. That's the, you know, other times where fights happen in groups and stuff like that, and barrooms and things like that. But I mean, I never seen him get that upset at somebody all once like that. It took me a while. They got to be friends after, you know, because Stover got to be friends with him as he got to know him as time went on. Anyways, but he says, but he always remembered when I ever mentioned it to him. Well, he asked, met how I mentioned that to him years later. He says, well, he really asked for that. He said. So.
If you were to say, Reg was, and give me 3 different things. Reg was this, he was this.
Well, I'd say the idea of an artist, the whole thing about fighting him was an art. I think he really had art in him more than he did. I think even movies and his idea of it was an art. I consider him more of an artist than I would anything. He would try to show his, you know, his feelings and everything in an artistic way. And of course, everybody knows he was an intellectual. You know, he studied a little bit about everything. And there wasn't hardly any subject he could mention that he couldn't talk to you about. Same as his friend George Stratton. You know, and George's my good friend too. But he, like I said, out of all the people I knew in my whole life that was capable of fighting, he probably ended up being the most, least aggressive one, no matter how much he knew, as he got older and as he studied it. What he was teaching, you know, the philosophy of it and so forth really struck home with him more than anything else. Somebody really had to get mad at him before he would do it. He would get aggressively mad, you know, aggressive back.
So if you were going to define him, you'd define him as an artist?
Yeah, more or less, yeah. I think that that's more or less the thing that I would define him by. Everything he did, it was like artistic, in an artistic way.
Very good. Thank you very much.
He wasn't barbaric type of fighter or anything. Everything just when he went into karate rather than the boxing and hitting and all that. He wanted to get into more of it in an artistic state. So,
wow. Yeah. What do you think his legacy will be?
I don't know. There's too much. There's too many. Actually, there's too many things that he was. There's too many things he was interested in, rather than, it wasn't one thing, actually, even though he was in karate. He always, like his son said, he's always thought he could do just about anything. Anything he wanted to do, he could do if he wanted to put his mind to it. So I guess it would be something along that manner. About never think like you're going to fail at anything or something like that, you know. You never had the idea about failing. The word failure never come into his category of thinking, you know.
My name's Darrell Lovely. I met Reggie in 1955 in Bramhall Square in Portland. We used to have coffee together at the Black and Silver Cafe and just hang around and do things together as friends. There wasn't just he and I, there was a whole bunch of people who had fun together. After I graduated from high school in 1956, I joined the Marine Corps. Reggie joined, I don't know, a couple months after I did. I did see him several times while I was on Parris Island for boot camp. And once I was transferred to Camp Lejeune, North Carolina, before his father passed away and he was discharged, we did see each other quite often. We used to go to the slop shoot and have a few beers together, and with a couple friends that we both knew, Bob Young, who has passed away, and Howard Curry. I think he lives somewhere in the Portland area still. And the four of us tried to see each other regularly because we had all known each other from when we were in high school here in Portland.
What do you remember the most about his personality specifically?
Reggie was always friendly, and he enjoyed the company of his friends, I think, from Portland, and we used to get together and talk about our friends here far away in Maine while we were down there in the South. But he was well liked by myself and my friends that were there at Camp Lejeune. We did have a good time with him, and terribly sorry that he's passed away.
What was he really interested in at that point? You know, what do you think his interest set was?
I think his interest, like most of us who were in the Marine Corps at the time, was probably getting through your enlistment and getting home and getting on with your life. That's what I used to think about, and I think he did also.
Did he have long-term ambitions then, do you think?
I don't ever remember talking to Reggie about long-term ambitions, about his or mine. We more or less just were looking for the opportunity to get away from the everyday drag of being Marines and having maybe a beer and talking with friends, just getting together.
Did you go out and raise a little hell here and there?
Not a whole lot. We did go into town a few times, but it seemed so most of the time that I would see him, it would be on the base. After hours, he'd come to my barracks. We'd meet at the slop shoot or wherever, go to the movies. Had a very nice movie theater there at Camp Lejeune, and they ran films every night. So I would run into him there.
He was always interested in movies.
Yep.
Always aspired to be in the movies or writing the movies, one or the other, right? Did he share that then?
Yes, we knew of his ambition to be an actor back from when he was in the Children's Theater. He used to bring a tape recorder from the Children's Theater that he would tape record all of us, sometimes secretly. Then he'd play us back and say, listen to what you said and how you sounded. A little bit sneaky, but it was fun.
How about after the Marines?
I saw Reggie probably through November of 1959. As a matter of fact, he took me to get my driver's license that year. I'd been driving without a license, and he took me to, he had his driver's license, so he drove me over there. But once I got laid off on a construction job here in Portland, I moved to Connecticut. And I only ever ran into him 2 or 3 times after that. We were up here on vacation once, and I did run into him in Monument Square. We had a nice chat, but other than that, I didn't see much of him after we had moved out of state.
So if you were going to characterize in 10 or 15 words or so your sort of definition of who you think Reggie was, what would you say?
Reggie was an artist. He wanted to perform, and I think most of all, Reggie wanted people to respect him and like him. He liked most everybody. When we were young, at least. I didn't know him when he was older. I did meet him a few times, like at Dickie Sabine's house in Lewiston, after I moved back to Maine, but always friendly and seemed to be as though he wanted to be liked and respected, like most of us.